welcome again. Glad that you're here. I saw, I asked people to say where they were watching from, in addition to your lounge chair or your living room. We've got some great responses, including Paris, France. So good morning, Paris, or good afternoon. I don't know which way the time is going, but we're grateful that you're tuning in, as well as everyone around the country and here locally in the greater Atlanta area. Welcome to Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. It's Mother's Day, and we're going to be speaking all month long about listening to our heart, and that is also the title for today's message, to invitation to listen to our heart. I thought I would begin this morning by entering into that Mother's Day call and to hearken back to where it all came from, to kind of provide some context, if I can, this morning for that awareness. So the call for Mother's Day came in the late 1860s, and the first proclamation for it was written in 1870. So remember this time, this is right out of the Civil War. The mothers of the nation came together from the South and the North because they had seen so much of the ravaging of war and the loss of their sons and their husbands and their brothers. And so they came together for a call for peace. And it was Julia Ward Howe, who also, you may know that from history class, who wrote the lyrics of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, member of the women's suffrage movement. And she wrote this in 1870. Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether our baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, our sons shall not be taken from us, to unlearn all that we've been able to teach them of charity, misery, and patience. We, women of one country, will be too tender to those of another, to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own, and it says, disarm, disarm. Let women now leave all that they may, left of home for a great earnest day of council. Let them first meet as women to wail, and then to commemorate the dead, and then to solemnly take counsel with each other, and to the means by where the great human family can live in peace, each bearing after their own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God. In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask for peace. That is Mother's Day. And so this call that Julia Ward Howe put out in 1870, this call of the divine feminine, I believe must now transform into a voice of the call of women to the voice of the call of the divine mother, that is a voice of humanity, that we all hear that call to come together, to take an earnest day of counsel for the principles of peace, and to say, disarm, disarm. If we contextualize this call for peace that is Mother's Day for just a moment longer, she says, we women of one country would be too tender to those of another, to allow our sons to be trained to kill theirs. And while she says one country versus another, remember it comes out of the Civil War. The two countries that she was most immediately thinking about was in our own country, the division between the North and the South, the two ways of thinking about what kind of nation we were going to be. Of course, it had implication about globalization and world wars and wars between other countries. But the context in which her consciousness is writing this piece She is coming out of the division and the polarization that had shed blood from the sons of one country divided against each other on this very land. Why? Because she has seen the ravages of war on her front doorsteps, as have all women of that day. And so they understood better than they ever could before about the misguidedness of war. And so she says, we must come together first to commemorate, first to wail, and then to commemorate the dead. And so I take the call of Mother's Day as a call to lean into the wisdom of the divine feminine, to listen to the heart of the divine feminine, to enter again, as we were discussing last week, the seat of the soul and the divine wisdom of that mother energy within all of us. And today I gather with each of you, first to wail and to commemorate the dead, to remember in name Ahmad Aubrey, a son born on Mother's Day 26 years ago, whose 26th birthday would have been this last Friday. I simply allow my heart to wail for a mother who won't hug her son today, for a mother who won't get that phone call or breakfast in bed or any other gesture of kindness and love. And then to answer the call to listen to the Sacred Heart, to take an earnest day of counsel, she says, to be in earnest about the principles of peace and how we might bring those forward. May our day, may our gathering here be such a moment. To answer this call, to understand what it means to listen to the Sacred Heart, I went back and I picked up a book that I have read and reread many times, a book that was so profoundly impactful to me. And in 1988, Matthew Fox wrote a book called The Coming of the Cosmic Christ. I have it here. I picked it up off my bookshelf. And I was in high school when I found this book in the early 90s, and it had such a deep impact on me. It was thick. It was the writing is small print and dense, and it shaped so much of my understanding about the cosmological perspective of the awakening of humanity, naming the elements of the sacred Christ consciousness that permeates itself through all the wisdom traditions, reawakening the divine feminine, lifting up a theological setting that embraces the Christos, the mythical Christ. This book, along with Paul Tillich's work, more than anything, has shaped my understanding of cosmic Christianity, which rests so comfortably and wonderfully well within the context of New Thought, which is why I've always embraced such a Christian theological ethic, not a practice ethic or doctrine ethic, but a theological perspective within my New Thought lens. I don't know what my peers were reading in high school, but this is what I had my hands on, and I was devouring it. It was really fun today, this weekend, to go back over some of the notes that I had made so long ago. And he describes in the beginning, the reason it came to me in prayer and meditation is he describes in the beginning of the book a dream which he had, which ended with the phrase, "Your mother is dying." And he goes in to explain in how he structures the book what he interpreted that to be. That society was dying, that Mother Earth was dying, that Mother Creativity was dying, that compassion, that the Mother Church was dying. And he takes each of these descriptions and he breaks them down and talks about the age that we are in. And then remember, this is over almost 40 years ago now, 30 years ago, I guess, and breaks down what he means by that, and then how we can rebuild out of an awakening, a cosmic awakening. And he says at the end of the section where he breaks down the dream and what is meant by this phrase, your mother is dying, he says this, he says, I believe it is a dream about the reigning dis-ease of our time, the reigning dis-ease of our time. Its symptom is matricide, or the killing of the maternal in everything all around us. But the disease itself is patriarchy. The symptoms, the reigning disease of our time, the symptoms is matricide, or the killing of the maternal in everything around us. But the disease itself is patriarchy. The period of Western civilization from about 4,500 BC to today, when the matricidal characteristics came to dominate the human psyche, institutions, and decision-making. But significantly, he says, the dream did not say, your mother is dead. It said, your mother is dying. There is still hope. The answer is a mystical awakening, a planetary awakening that brings about the wisdom of every tradition, the justice maker, the player, the compassionate warrior in all of us. And so he spends the rest of the book talking about the great awakening that must take place through the arts and through creativity and through compassion and through justice work and through the church and through the re-embrace of the sacred mysticism of Christianity and all traditions. And so much of his work is based in that deep listening to the cosmic wisdom of the heart of the planet. The mystical awakening is deeply related to that listening of the heart. When you talk about listening to the heart, you're talking about tuning into the mystic self. Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh says this, God cannot catch us unless we stay in the unconscious room of our hearts. God cannot catch us unless we stay in the unconscious room of our hearts. Unconscious is not a bad word there. Unconscious means the non-logical, right? The subconscious, the place of intuition, right? That unless we stay in that place that knows of a wisdom beyond logic, a wisdom beyond understanding, the non-rational part of our brain that tries to make sense of everything, but that part of intuitive wisdom that just knows that it knows that it knows. Right? That's the room he's speaking of. Unless we stay in that room, which is in our hearts, then and only then can God find us. This intuitive mystic space is what is seeking to be awakened in everything that is happening around us, including the tragic death of Ahmaud Arbery, which I'll speak more about in a moment. We need to reawakening the mystic heart. Alice Miller said that a society that denies the mystic is no civilization at all. It offers no hope, no adventure, no challenge, no worthy sacrifice, no joy to its youth or to its artist. It offers no festivities, no Sabbath, no living ritual to its people, and no deep healing. Such a culture actually promotes negative addictions to drugs, alcohol, consumerism, and materialism. It encourages us to seek outside stimulants, to provide meaning for life and defense from enemies, because it is so woefully out of touch with the power inside. A society that denies the mystic is no civilization at all. That's exactly where we are right now. And the great challenge is that where we have been, this society that has denied the mystic, this society that has encouraged these addictions to faux mysticism, right? Drug addiction, alcohol, numbing out, consumerism, etc., are all faux mysticism. They're fake ways of trying to connect and make meaning, right? Which is what happens when a society is missing the mystic heart. It has to try to replace it with something. Right. And this place where we have been, this place that has been breaking down in recent months and breaking down for a long time, but has really come to our face about its breaking down in recent months. The challenge is that we have called this place normal. That's our biggest challenge. We've called where we have been normal, but it's not. It lacks the intuitive wisdom of the heart. It lacks compassion and justice. It lacks creativity in the arts. It lacks imagination when handling issues like homelessness and drug addiction and poverty and racism and everything else, right? And the problem with the way that our minds work in terms of what we call normal, the reason I want to speak about this for a moment is that the challenge, when you call something normal, when your brain subconsciously even accepts something as normal, right? There's another word for that, which is it creates a homeostasis, a place of settling and setting the thermostat to this is home base, right? This is normal. This is homeostasis. The challenge with that from a consciousness perspective is that we can set a homeostasis for a level of conditioning and a level of being that isn't actually healthy for us. Come on, talk to me, somebody. We can set a homeostasis that is actually toxic, right? That is actually works against our greater good. But our brain calls it normal, and because our brain calls it normal, and it's the set of homeostasis, we will go back to it over and over and over again. We'll actually defend our right to go back to what we have called normal, even if it's unhealthy for us. In relationships, we call that codependency, right? We call that addiction. We call that all kinds of things from a clinical psychological perspective, but mostly we call it unhealthy. To have a homeostasis that is not about our greater good. And that's exactly what we have done here. Sonia Renee Taylor, some of you have seen this painted on a wall. I don't know where it's painted somewhere, but I've posted it on Facebook and many others have as well. Sonia Renee Taylor said, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence," that's a phrase now that you can use, right? Our pre-corona existence was not normal. Other than that, we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. We have been given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of nature and humanity. Matthew Fox, in his book, speaks of the forms of pseudo-mysticism that arise when a society lacks a true cosmological understanding of its place, and a true mysticism rested in its awareness and in its consciousness. There are many that he lists. I'm not going to list all of them. Again, his work is quite extensive, but some of them that I wanted to point out that called to me as I looked over the list last night. These are just a few. Nationalism, all pseudo-mysticism. Nationalism, the idol in which the idol of national security allows us to operate from a consciousness that says we will spend any amount of money. We will simply make up the money to be able to spend it. Any amount of money to be able to protect our identity from being attacked. Pseudo-mysticism as nationalism deprives the poor and the unemployed from basic necessities of life and denies their right for a decent existence, and justifies it by saying we need to spend the money over here, not on your basic dignity, but protecting our collective identity, which is a false sense of self. Right? Tied with that, militarism, fascism. He even names technology as a pseudo-mysticism, the myth that new technology will save us and create peace. Consumerism, that the things we buy will give us peace and meaning. And as long as we have meaning, we don't have to worry ourselves with the poor or those disenfranchised, because after all, they should just work harder so that they can buy the things that will give them meaning. You see how these work as pseudo-mysticism. They step in to give us a sense of connection to the greater, but they don't really do an adequate job at all. Some of the others he pronounces are fundamentalism. And then this last one, I really wanted to spend some time on. I thought it was really fascinating. He said, this is number 7 of the ones that he identifies. He says, mystiques. And mystiques are the attachment to the projection of hero characters, right? Hero characters in our movies and in our comic books and in our movie tales, our savior politicians, popes, ball players, rock stars, celebrities, all born of projection, projecting the ideal self, right? He says a true mystic no longer projects, but faces the isness of life, right? Does not project to the isness of life, but faces the isness of life. The reason I wanted to bring this book in and this work and this idea of the dream of your mother is dying, and then he says, but it said your mother is not dead. It said your mother is dying. There's still hope. Is that, this was in the 90s when I discovered this, 1988 when he wrote it. And what I've noticed during this pandemic season is that all of the things that he named as things that were dying are things that during this cosmic pause, if we want to call it that, are things that are beginning to heal themselves and reemerge. Creativity in the arts, compassion, the prophetic voice of the church, Mother Earth and nature, the blue skies over Los Angeles and Istanbul and the canals of Venice and all of those sorts of things, right? And so there's something about in this pause that we've been given, or as I said many weeks ago when this started, our mother has sent us all to our room, right? Cosmic Mother has sent us to our room to think about what we've done. In that space, that which was dying is coming back to life, you see. And particularly this last one of the pseudo-mysticism, this mystiquism, this projection of characters, political figures and savior figures, and as he says, popes and ball players and rock stars and celebrities. You've noticed who we in this space have called the new heroes. It's the mask-wearing first responders, the nurses and the caretakers and the grocery store clerks and the truck drivers and the shelf stockers and all of these frontline essential workers. And it's a collective, right? It's not one person. Part of a symbol of the reawakening of humanity is that we no longer look to savior figures, but we discover the hero and the championing capacities that we have within inside of ourselves. And it becomes a collective, not one person, right? which doesn't fit as well in a consumer-based society. Because if you have one person, you can write the novel, you can write the story, you can write the movie, you can sell, you can have action figures, you can have posters, you can, right? It fits the consumer model, and our brain is trained to that. Who is the one person that will figure all of this out? Who is the one person that will lead us forward? And that's a tale that is as old as time. You read it in all of the sacred stories. Moses will liberate us, Jesus will liberate us, Zoroaster, Caesar, so on and so forth, right? But now, what we're discovering, the hero among us is the collective. The hero are those who have the capacity to stay home, really the privilege to stay home. Those who have the courage to go to work, to stock the grocery shelves, and to run the checkout stands, and to be the caretakers in the hospitals and nursing facilities. And it's a collective body. The hero idol worship has come down a notch and has begun to settle into the soul of humanity as the all of us. And that's a very good sign. That's a very healthy sign that we want to pick up on and make more of, the collective. Yeah, I'm seeing some of the comments here. The bus drivers, absolutely. And so what is the new mysticism, the mysticism that we must awaken to? What is that based on? Emmett Fox in his book gives 21 definitions of what the new collective awakening of mysticism must be based on. I'm not going to go through all 21. You can look at the book if you choose. But some of them that, again, stood out to me. He said it must be based on personal experience. Right? Nobody can tell you your mystical experience. It's something you have to walk into yourself. Non-dualism, right? Characterized by the notion of a non-dual reality, that there's really only one of us here. There's one thing happening, right? Compassion, right? Connection making, radical amazement. This is one he labels, I love radical amazement, the radical amazement at the most mundane things. Yeah. And the affirmation of the world as a whole. These are some of the things that he labels as identifiers for the new mysticism. If I were to summarize for you all of this, we can look at history through a lens of different periods, right? Matriarchal period, earth-based religions, listening to the voice of the mother and the ancestors, which is very primal and old, and then beginning the patriarchal period, beginning, as Matthew Fox said, about 4,500 BC, and then in Greece, shattering the harmony of the goddess archetype, moving all the way to basically to today, which has been breaking down for probably at least 200 years. The breakdown period is a long time when you consider all of humanity and human history. But the breakdown is rapidly accelerating, and we're stepping out of the patriarchy age and not into a matriarchal age, but into a sacred marriage age, as Andrew Harvey's work would indicate, a sacred marriage, the blending of the divine feminine and masculine, that such that Mother's Day is a celebration of all of us, because we all are mothers and birthing ideas into the world. Father's Day is a celebration for all of us. We're moving beyond the binary constructs of this or that, but honoring the entire spectrum in between, and the nuances and the beauty and the creativity that exist in the in-between spaces. And all of that paradigm and spectrum lives inside of each one of us, right? And so sacred marriage looks like the joining of forces, the joining of the wisdom of mother with the capacities of the father, and to fashion a new world of justice and peace. Matthew Fox defines the mystic, by the way, the mystic, what is mystic making, right? And he says the mystic is, one is measured by two things: justice making and compassion. Justice making and compassion. Is it of the mystic's heart? Is it based in justice making? And is it based in compassion? Right? And so we often wonder, well, what can I do? What can I do in the face of inequity, in the face of discrimination, in the face of white supremacy and terrible news and an incident of yet another senseless violence towards a Black body? What can I do? It's a reasonable question. But I believe the answer begins with a listening. The first thing that we must do, it doesn't end there. Don't get me wrong. It's not a passive response. We must be active in our response. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But it begins with listening. It begins with deeply listening to our heart. Our first conscious capacity was the capacity to listen. Come on, talk to me, somebody. Where's my bell? Our first conscious capacity was the capacity to listen. As an embryo, the first capacity that we developed was the capacity to hear our mother's heartbeat. Are we listening still to the mother's heartbeat? I asked myself this question. What do you hear when you listen to the beat of the Divine Mother's heart? What do you hear when you listen to the beat of the Divine Mother's heart? And what came forward was a poem. I don't often write poetry. I don't consider myself a poet, but occasionally when I'm in a deep mystical place, and often when I'm sermon writing, poetry will occasionally pop out of me. So I'm no Jericho Brown. Shout out to Jericho, SLCA, and Atlanta's own Pulitzer Prize winning poet. Nor am I even a Benny Robinson in our community who's written so much great poetry and shared with us. But occasionally poetry, Spirit speaks to me in this way and something comes out. And so I asked myself the question, when you listen to the beat of Divine Mother's heart, what do you hear? This is what came forward. When you listen to the beat of Divine Mother's heart, what do you hear? Go back to normal? Resume as you were before? No. I hear the wail of a broken-hearted mother, mourning the loss of her children. I hear her cry. I hear her cry for the one lying in the street in his jogging shorts. I hear her cry for the one who lives in fear, who has turned that fear into hate and that hate into violence. She cries for the child who has lost his way. She cries for the child that won't see its next birthday. But mostly, she moans because no one seems to hear her tears. What do you hear when you listen to the beat of the Divine Mother's heart? Go back to normal? Resume as you were before? No. I hear the wail of a broken-hearted mother, mourning the loss of her children. I hear her cry for the one lying in the street in his jogging shorts. I hear her cry for the one who lives in fear, who has turned that fear into hate and that hate into violence. She cries for the child who has lost his way. And she cries for the child that won't see its next birthday. But mostly now, she moans because no one seems to hear her tears. We have normalized, as it was said earlier in the Sonia Renee Taylor passage, we have normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction. I would add to that list racism, supremacy. We should not long to return. We have been given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. Andrew Harvey proposes in his work about the sacred marriage that this new era be based on three things, three laws, and I'm going to add a fourth. But I'll tell you what the three laws are that he proposes. One, the unity of all life, that everything is connected to everything, extending this sacred knowledge to all, extending the sacred knowledge of all religions and mystical traditions, the Great Mother. The second law is the law of rhythm, right? To understand that the laws of nature are rhythmic, and by listening to the law of the rhythmic nature, we would therefore enact and behave in such a way that responds to that rhythm, rather than consumerism and economic systems that are based on ignoring the rhythms of nature, suppressing the rhythms of nature, and creating and producing in ways that are out of balance with the sequence and the rhythm of nature. Instead, we would listen to the rhythm of nature and be in cooperation with its tides. And number three, the law or the love of the dance, the third law, the love of the dance, which is to say, in his description, he says, what is being restored, this is Andrew Harvey, what is being restored is a totally unmorbid, healthy, exuberant, sensual, ecstatic vision of life, where there's no duality, no separation between body and mind, between heaven and earth, or between prayer and action. Love of the dance. What's being restored is a totally unmorbid, healthy, exuberant, sensual, ecstatic vision of life, where there's no duality and no separation between body and mind, heaven and earth, prayer and action. I would venture to say that if we could capture what is happening here, what's being knocked on the doorway of our heart right now as humanity, if we could catch the vision, we would go through nothing less than a radical transformation. But there are forces that seek to get us to go back to normal, right? The impetus of the human family is right now, in the human culture right now, is to go back to normal. Go back to the malls, go back to the stores, go back to the places, to go, right? All the states trying to go back to work, right? And this back to work is like the Divine Mother has sent us to our room to think about what we've done. And we have come out of the room like an anxious teenager ready to get back to what they were doing before. And the Mother has said, have you learned? Have you learned? What have you learned? Right? Did you learn the lesson? What did I send you in there for? And just like an anxious teenager, we would say, oh, yeah, I learned. Yeah, I will never do that again. And I promise I'll always wear a mask and I'll wash my hands and it's all good. Yeah, thank you. I got it. Right. And if you've ever been a parent, a mother or father in that situation, you know that you have, quote unquote, heard the right words, but you know that they have just been presented to you as the right words. And deep down, nothing has changed. And that what's driving the right words is simply the desire to go back to normal, go back to the way it was, go back to what you were doing before you were sent to your room. That's where we are right now. But the question is, do we have the moral courage and the prophetic vision to create something new, to create that new garment that fits all of humanity? Let me just share a few more things and bring it to a close this morning. I would add a fourth law, Remember, the laws are the law of life, the unity of all life, the law of rhythm, and the love of the dance. Those are the three that Andrew Harvey proposes. I would add a fourth law, the law of prophetic vision. And the law of the prophetic vision says that when we listen deeply enough, what is ours to do not only becomes clear, but it becomes non-negotiable. Hear that? When we listen deeply enough, what is ours to do not only becomes clear, it becomes non-negotiable. See, what we have to recognize right now is that we are, even all of us connected in this moment, are living in a spiritual milieu, in an environment in which awakening is optional. Right? I can choose to be awake. I can choose to pay attention. I can choose, and then out of that, I can say, "What is mine to do?" And I can tell you, well, our society is still ravaged by the evils of white supremacy and separation thinking and discrimination and all of these things. And you might respond out of a heart of compassion and say, "Well, what is mine to do?" And I could say, "Well, you have these options. Right? You could read a book. You could watch the movie The 13th. You could do this, do that. You could pick up James Baldwin's work. You could take a class. You could do this, that, or the other thing. Here are some options." But when we listen deeply enough, hear me, when we listen deeply enough to the mystical heart, what is ours to do is not only clear, it's non-negotiable. It's not a choice. It's not, "Well, yeah, I could do that." No. You are compelled. You must. You must. For the sake of humanity, right? We're standing at the threshold, and the Divine Mother is asking the question, will white people in particular, right? Will white people do what is needed to be done? Or will they simply take it as an optional, as an elective in the school of life? Or will we do the radical work of transforming and healing our pain so that we can create a world of justice making and compassion? Right? Let me be clear, this is not easy. There will be pain associated with this level of awakening. As we previously discussed in previous weeks, and that level of pain is in direct proportion to the level of attachment that we have to our conclusions and our old ways. But it's a doorway that we must go through. Rumi said it this way: every midwife knows that not until a mother's womb softens from the pain of labor will a way unfold and the infant find that opening to be born. Not until a mother's womb softens from the pain of labor will a way unfold that the infant find the opening to be born. Oh, friend, there is a treasure in your heart. It is heavy with child. Listen, all of the awakened ones, like trusted midwives, are saying, welcome this pain. It opens the dark passage of grace. Like trusted midwives, all the awakened ones are saying, welcome this pain. It opens the dark passage of grace. So as we listen deeply to what is ours to do, it is not only clear, it is non-negotiable. It is non-negotiable that we speak out about injustice. It is not enough that we speak out. We must pick it out by the roots, you see. A post that I shared on social media, Drew Hart said it this way, and I'm using his words because I can't think of a better way to say it. He says, until white supremacy itself is bound, arrested, and confined for good, anti-Black violence will continue on. Arresting people who merely perform whiteness fall short of God's justice, regardless of our convictions, because the same story will repeat itself with different people. Justice for Ahmaud Arbery requires that white supremacy no longer run free. You see, so we have to have the moral courage to call out the thinking behind the act, not just the act. It's easy to call out the act. Of course, that should not have happened. But what is the thinking that led to it behind the act? The thinking that created, promoted, or allowed the environment in which that act took place, right? Everything that we're conscious beings, consciousness is everything, and I promise I'm coming to a close here. Consciousness is everything, but and when we create, promote, or allow. Those are the three ways: create, promote, or allow everything that exists. So what is the thinking that created, promoted, or allowed that incident to take place? Of course, we all think it's terrible. Of course, we call it out. That's not enough. We got to go behind the scenes to the unconscious. What create, promoted, or allowed that to take place systemically, you see. The thinking that allowed these two men to sit home for 2 months before being arrested. The thinking that perpetuated the racial contract in America, which holds black and brown bodies to different standards and systemically uses the system of law and order to grant freedom to white bodies while it punishes black and brown bodies. Ooh. Let me say it again. To call out and to question and to examine and to root out the thinking that allowed these two men to sit at home for 2 months before being arrested. The thinking that perpetuates the racial contracts in America. What do I mean by racial contracts? Look it up if you don't know. Racial contracts which hold black and brown bodies in America to different standards and systemically uses the systems of law and order to grant freedom to white bodies while it punishes black and brown ones. What do I mean by that? I mean the system of thinking and laws that said that the defense system was simply the guy who videoed it, right? The accomplice in the car behind, right? Who videoed it and then sent it in because he thought that sharing it would actually help get his friends out of trouble. Right, it would help in their defense, should a defense be needed, right? He sent it in before they were arrested, but it would clear their name, right? Because it was justified. Look, he said, right, Ahmad, didn't stand still, right? He tried to get around and then he confronted the guy with the rifle. And so it was self-defense. You see the insidiousness of the kind of thinking that says, that holds the standard to black and brown bodies, that black and brown people must be impeccable with their behavior and always demure and polite in the presence of white bodies, else they be punished. And if they are punished, then the any act of injustice or immoral behavior on behalf of the white person is justified because, after all, the black and brown body didn't behave properly. That's systemic white supremacy embedded in our culture, going back to the 1860s. Well, back further before that, but back when we were fighting about it in the Civil War in the 1860s and the call for Mother's Day. Oh, I'm coming home now. Don't worry. I haven't lost track. I know I've gone long today. I apologize. And so that fourth law must be the law of prophetic vision, which says that our way out is via the way of prophetic vision and moral courage. Let me be clear. Our capacity to shape a new world, our capacity to shape that garment which fits all of humanity and nature, our capacity to do that depends entirely upon the willingness of everyday people, and particularly white people, I must say, right? It rests entirely upon the willingness of everyday people to fashion themselves into mystics and prophets of a new world. Our capacity to shape a new world in this moment depends entirely upon the willingness of everyday people to fashion themselves into mystics and prophets of a new world. And if a mystic is measured by the standard of justice making and compassion, and a prophet is merely a mystic who speaks out, that's all a prophet is, right? A mystic is measured by justice making and compassion, and a prophet is merely a mystic who takes action. If those two things are true, then I boldly suggest that we create sacred space where prophetic vision and moral imagination is cultivated into the call for a world that works for everyone. And I boldly suggest and claim that Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta can be a unique place, even within the family of Centers for Spiritual Living and in the world of New Thought, a unique place which has the DNA, the capacity, and the courage to do that work, which means the white people in our space have the capacity to look at what is theirs to do. Our Black and brown bodies in their space have the capacity to be present, to be celebrated, to be lifted up, and to also be authentic with their pain and their desire for change. And that together we fashion something that has prophetic vision and moral imagination to go deep into healing and to bring forward new vision, to bring that garment. I believe that Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta has a unique capacity to step into this work, but it's not by default. It's not going to happen just because we all love each other. It's going to happen because we say yes to it and we pledge ourselves to it financially, physically, emotionally, etc. All right. My final closing. Another poem by Lynn Unger, because I want to invite you to breathe. Take a breath. And this poem will, I pray, bring it home and all together what we're to do now. I'm on a little fired up right now. I could keep talking, but I need to bring it to a close. Breathe. Breathe, said the wind. How can I breathe at a time like this, when the air is full of smoke, of burning tires and burning lives? Just breathe, insisted the wind. Easy for you to say. If the weight of injustice is not wrapped around your throat, cutting off all air. I need you to breathe. I need you to breathe. Don't tell me to be calm when there is so much reason to be angry, so much cause for despair. I didn't ask you to be calm, said the wind. I said to breathe. We're going to need a lot of air to make this hurricane together. I didn't ask you to be calm. I asked you to breathe, said the wind. We're going to need a lot of wind to make this hurricane together. My beloveds, my Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta family, I believe that there was a breath of holy God of wind seeking to move through us as justice making and compassion that brings our New Thought principles of understanding that consciousness is everything. It gives us the capacity to listen deeply to the mystical heart and to fashion new garments for all of humanity. But it is not just quaint words that make us feel good in kumbaya moments. It is deep work that requires commitment, examination, and courage. I want to invite you into that work. I want to invite you to pledge support and give of yourself to this space, because I believe that we can be a unique place for the world to hear this message. And most importantly, for people who come into our space to be invited into that work. Let's do it together. Peace and blessings. Okay, where am I? When I have my notes on my screen, I'm not seeing a clock. So there we have it. There was today. Thank you, beloveds. I appreciate you being present in all the ways that you are this morning. We're grateful for all of our ways of giving. This is your way to breathe life into this center. This is your way now in our committed giving for you to support and to affirm who we are and what we are doing here. I mean what I say when I believe that we have a unique capacity to answer this moment, but it's not going to happen by default. It's not going to happen by automatic pilot. It's going to happen because we pledge, because we support, because we give, because we have the moral courage to say yes and to do the deep work that's needed. So let's show up deeply with our gifts this day, whatever gift you have in your hand, in your heart. If you're an automatic pledger, I invite you to go within and consider if there's even more that you might be able to do. And if you haven't joined our giving community yet, what a perfect moment to feel and the call and the listening of your heart to say yes to a gift of any size. Text it to 404-800-9467. And as we do that, and we're grateful for all the gifts that have come in, let us say our affirmation together. I live in a universe of abundance. As I freely and joyfully give, I join in the divine flow, and all that I share with life returns to me multiplied abundantly. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. I know that we are abundantly supported and divinely fulfilled in this moment.